The morning I found the certified letter from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA wedged into my mailbox. I had just finished stacking the last cord of oak on my deck, and I remember thinking this winter was going to be the most profitable season yet. My name is Andrew Northwood, and I had been running a firewood business from my property in rural Montana for the past 3 years. The house sat on 2 acres at the edge of a planned community called Meadowbrook Hills, right outside of Whitefish. When I bought the place back in 2019, there were maybe 20 homes in the development, and the HOA was practically non-existent. The neighborhood consisted mostly of retirees and young families who appreciated the rustic mountain lifestyle. My firewood business had become a local staple, providing seasoned hardwood to dozens of residents who relied on wood-burning stoves and fireplaces to supplement their heating during the brutal Montana winters. I tore open the envelope with my work gloves still on, leaving dirt smudges across the pristine white paper. The letter was typed in that officious font that screamed bureaucracy, and it was signed by one Patricia Brennan, the newly elected HOA president. I had heard about Patricia through the neighborhood grapevine. She had moved in 6 months ago from some suburb outside Seattle, bringing with her very specific ideas about how a community should look and operate. According to my neighbor Tom, Patricia had campaigned for HOA president on a platform of beautifying the neighborhood and maintaining property values. The letter was brief and to the point. Effective immediately, I was prohibited from stacking firewood on my deck or any other visible location on my property. The reasoning cited was Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws, which apparently stated that no outdoor storage of commercial materials was permitted in a manner that detracted from the aesthetic appeal of the community. I had 30 days to remove the current stacks and cease all related activities or face fines of $250 per day. I read the letter 3 times, my jaw tightening with each pass. The deck in question was behind my house, barely visible from the street. The firewood was neatly stacked in uniform rows, covered with tarps during wet weather, and took up maybe a quarter of the deck space. I had been running this business openly for years without a single complaint. More importantly, at least 15 families in Meadowbrook Hills were regular customers who depended on my firewood to heat their homes affordably. That evening, I drove over to Tom's place to show him the letter. Tom Henderson was in his early 60s, a retired contractor who had lived in Meadowbrook Hills since the development first broke ground. He read the letter while standing in his driveway, his weathered face creasing into a frown. "This is Patricia's doing," he said, handing the letter back to me. "She has been going after anyone she thinks doesn't fit her vision. The Martins got cited for having their trash cans visible from the street, even though they were behind a fence. The young couple on Pine Street got a warning for parking their work truck in their own driveway because it had a company logo on the side. Can she actually enforce this?" I asked. "I checked the original bylaws when I bought the house. There was nothing about firewood or home businesses." "She pushed through amendments at the last board meeting," Tom explained. "Only about 20 people showed up to vote, mostly her friends and the busybodies who have nothing better to do. The rest of us did not even know it was happening until after the fact." She has been sending out these letters ever since, targeting anyone she considers unsightly. I felt my anger building. "Tom, you buy firewood from me. So do the Richardsons, the Kowalskis, and a bunch of other families. What are they supposed to do when winter really hits?" "Pay 3 times as much at the hardware store," Tom shrugged helplessly. "I do not know, Andrew, but I can tell you that Patricia does not care about practical concerns. She cares about appearances. She wants this place to look like some sterile subdivision where everything is beige and boring. The next morning, I decided to attend the HOA meeting scheduled for that Thursday. I wanted to appeal the decision directly, explain my situation, and hopefully reach some kind of compromise. Maybe I could build a storage shed that was less visible, or relocate the stacks to a different part of my property. I was willing to work with them within reason. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that served as a gathering space for events and official business. When I arrived at 7 in the evening, about 30 people were already seated in folding chairs facing a long table where the HOA board sat. Patricia Brennan occupied the center position, flanked by 2 other board members I did not recognize. Patricia was exactly what I had imagined based on the neighborhood gossip. She appeared to be in her late 40s, with severely styled blonde hair and the kind of outfit that looked expensive but uncomfortable. She wore a blazer over a silk blouse despite the casual nature of the meeting, and her lipstick was a shade of red that seemed designed to intimidate. She carried herself with the self-assured posture of someone who believed she was always the smartest person in the room. The meeting began with routine business: approval of last month's minutes, financial reports, discussion of landscaping contracts. I waited through 45 minutes of tedium before the floor was opened for homeowner concerns. I raised my hand immediately. Patricia's eyes flickered over me with thinly veiled disdain. "Yes, you in the back. Please state your name and address for the record." I stood up, feeling the eyes of the room on me. "Andrew Northwood, 447 Elk Ridge Road. I received a letter about my firewood business, and I would like to discuss the situation." "There is nothing to discuss," Patricia said, her tone clipped and final. "The bylaws are clear. Commercial storage that impacts neighborhood aesthetics is prohibited." "With all due respect," I said, keeping my voice level, "I have been running this business for 3 years without any issues. My firewood is neatly stacked, well-maintained, and barely visible from the street. More importantly, many residents in this community rely on me for affordable heating fuel." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. I saw Tom nodding vigorously, along with several other faces I recognized as customers. Patricia's expression hardened. "Mr. Northwood, this is not about your personal convenience or even the convenience of other residents. This is about maintaining standards that protect everyone's property values. Your commercial operation is not appropriate for a residential community. The rules apply to everyone equally." "But these rules were just changed," I protested. "I bought my property under different bylaws. You cannot retroactively punish me for something that was allowed when I started." One of the other board members, a thin man with glasses, leaned forward. "Actually, we can. The HOA has the authority to amend bylaws with a simple majority vote of attending members. That vote was conducted properly, and the new rules are legally binding." "How many people were at that vote?" I asked, because I was not notified, and I am guessing most of the neighborhood was not either. Patricia's face flushed slightly. "Notification was sent via email to all registered members. If you failed to check your email, that is not our problem. And for the record, 43 residents voted in favor of the amendments." "There are over 200 homes in this community," I said, my frustration growing. 43 votes is hardly a mandate." "It is a majority of those who cared enough to participate," Patricia shot back. "Democracy rewards those who show up, Mr. Northwood. Now, unless you have something new to add, I suggest you comply with the directive in your letter. This discussion is closed." I wanted to argue further, but Tom caught my eye and shook his head slightly. I sat down, seething. The meeting continued with other mundane business, but I barely heard any of it. My mind was racing through options, legal strategies, ways to fight back against this arbitrary enforcement. After the meeting ended, several residents approached me in the parking lot. Sarah Richardson, a single mother of two who heated her home almost exclusively with wood, looked worried. "Andrew, what are you going to do?" she asked. "I cannot afford to buy firewood from the hardware store. Your prices are the only reason I can keep my house warm." "I do not know yet," I admitted, "but I am not going down without a fight." Over the next week, I consulted with a lawyer in Kalispell who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. Her name was Jennifer Cole, and she had a reputation for being tough and knowledgeable. After reviewing all my documents, including the original bylaws, the recent amendments, and Patricia's letter, she gave me the bad news. "They are technically within their rights," Jennifer said, leaning back in her office chair. "The HOA does have the authority to amend bylaws, and the process they followed, while questionable from an ethical standpoint, meets the minimum legal requirements. You could challenge it in court, but it would be expensive and time-consuming, and your chances of winning are maybe 50-50 at best." "So I am just supposed to shut down my business?" I asked, feeling defeated. "Not necessarily," Jennifer said thoughtfully. "You have some options. First, you could comply with the letter by moving your firewood storage to a location that does not violate the new rules. Second, you could organize other homeowners to overturn the amendments at the next member vote. Third, you could sell your firewood from off-site and just deliver to customers. The bylaws prohibit visible storage, but they do not prohibit sales themselves." I considered these options as I drove back to Whitefish. Moving the firewood seemed impractical since my property did not have many locations that were both accessible for deliveries and completely hidden from view. Organizing a counter-vote would take months and require rallying a community that was largely apathetic. The off-site storage option might work, but it would significantly increase my costs and logistical complexity. And then, sitting at a red light on Highway 93, a different idea came to me. If the HOA wanted to play hardball, I could play hardball too. They could not force me to sell firewood to anyone. If they wanted to ban my visible operation, fine. But that meant the residents of Meadowbrook Hills would have to find their own sources. And in rural Montana, with winter approaching fast, that was easier said than done. I spent the next few days quietly reaching out to my regular customers within the HOA community. I explained the situation and told them that I would no longer be able to sell them firewood due to the new restrictions. Most were sympathetic and angry at Patricia, but there was not much they could do. Several asked if I could make exceptions or deliver from off-site, but I politely declined. If I was going to take a stand, it needed to be absolute. The response was mixed. Some people understood and supported my position. Others were frustrated that I was dragging them into my dispute with the HOA. But I noticed something interesting. Nobody directed their anger at me. All the frustration flowed toward Patricia and the board. When I submitted my official response to the HOA, I kept it brief and professional. I confirmed that I would remove all visible firewood from my property within the required 30-day period. I did not mention that I had already sold most of my current inventory to customers outside the development, or that I had arranged to rent storage space at a friend's farm 10 miles away, where I could continue selling to non-HOA customers. As far as Meadowbrook Hills was concerned, I was out of the firewood business. The deadline came and went. I had cleared my deck completely, stacking everything at the off-site location. Patricia sent me a terse email confirming that I was now in compliance and warning me that any future violations would result in immediate fines. I did not respond. October turned to November, and the weather began to shift. Montana winters do not ease you in gently. The temperature dropped from the 50s to the 20s in a matter of days, and the first real snowfall hit in mid-November, dumping 8 inches overnight. That was when the phone calls started. Sarah Richardson was first. "Andrew, I know you are not selling anymore, but I am desperate. I only have about a week's worth of wood left, and the hardware store wants $400 for a cord. I cannot afford that. Is there any way you could make an exception?" "I am sorry, Sarah," I said, and I genuinely meant it. "But if I sell to you, Patricia will find me into oblivion. She has made it clear that she is watching my property. I cannot risk it." "What am I supposed to do?" Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "My kids are going to freeze." "Try the suppliers in Columbia Falls or Kalispell," I suggested. "They are more expensive, but they deliver." "I called them already. They are backed up for 3 weeks because everyone waited until the last minute to order." I felt terrible, but I held firm. "I am sorry, I really am, but this is not my fault. This is the HOA's policy." Similar calls came from the Kowalskis, the Hendersons, and at least a dozen other families. Each conversation was harder than the last, but I knew that caving would undermine the entire point of my stand. If the HOA wanted to regulate me out of business, they could live with the consequences. By early December, Meadowbrook Hills was in the grip of a genuine heating crisis. The weather had turned brutally cold, with nighttime temperatures dipping below zero. Several families who relied heavily on wood heat were burning through their supplies faster than anticipated. The hardware store in Whitefish had sold out of firewood completely, and the few suppliers willing to deliver were charging premium rates with waiting lists that stretched into January. That was when the complaints started rolling into the HOA. I heard about it through Tom, who remained friendly with a few board members despite his disagreements with Patricia. Residents were demanding that the board do something about the firewood shortage. Some suggested that the bylaw amendment be temporarily suspended to allow me to resume sales. Others wanted the HOA to arrange a bulk purchase from a commercial supplier to help struggling families. Patricia's response, according to Tom, was dismissive. She argued that the firewood issue was not the HOA's responsibility and that residents should have planned better for winter. She suggested that people simply turn up their electric or gas heat. When someone pointed out that many homes in the development relied on wood as their primary heat source specifically because electric and propane were so expensive, Patricia allegedly replied that perhaps those people should reconsider whether they could afford to live in Meadowbrook Hills. That comment, repeated and amplified through the neighborhood gossip network, turned opinion sharply against her. Even residents who had supported the aesthetic improvements began questioning whether Patricia's priorities were in the right place. A petition started circulating to call a special meeting to revisit the bylaw amendments. Meanwhile, I continued running my business from the off-site location, serving customers from outside the development. Business was booming. Word had spread about quality and fair prices, and I had people driving from as far as Big Fork and Kalispell to buy cords. I felt a twinge of guilt knowing that my former neighbors were struggling while I was turning away their business, but I also knew that sometimes you had to let people feel the full weight of bad decisions before they would change course. In mid-December, things escalated. I was at home one evening when I heard a knock at my door. Opening it, I found Patricia standing on my porch, bundled in an expensive-looking coat, her expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been desperation. "Mr. Northwood," she said formally, "may I come in?" I considered refusing, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sure." She stepped inside and I led her to the living room. She remained standing, looking around at my modest furnishings with barely concealed disdain. "I will get straight to the point," she said. "The board has been receiving numerous complaints about the Firewood situation. While we stand by our decision regarding commercial operations in the neighborhood, we recognize that some residents are experiencing hardship." "Okay," I said, waiting for her to get to the point. "We would like to arrange a compromise. If you agree to maintain your storage in a less visible manner, perhaps behind a fence or in a shed, we would be willing to grant you a variance to continue limited sales to residents." "Limited sales," I repeated. "What does that mean?" "You could sell to residents with documented need, subject to approval by the Architectural Review Committee. No more than 2 cords per household per month, and all transactions would need to be logged with the HOA office." I stared at her, genuinely amazed at the audacity. "So you want me to resume business, but under your complete control, with restrictions that would make the operation barely profitable, and with bureaucratic oversight that would require me to ask your permission for every sale." "It is a reasonable compromise given the circumstances," Patricia said stiffly. "No," I said simply, her eyes widened slightly. "Excuse me. No, I am not interested in your compromise. You shut down my business with zero consideration for how it would affect the community. Now you want me to come crawling back under conditions that favor your authority and control. The answer is no." Patricia's face flushed. "You are being incredibly selfish, Mr. Northwood. People are suffering because you are too proud to accept a reasonable solution. People are suffering because you passed a ridiculous rule without thinking through the consequences." I shot back, my own anger rising. "You wanted to play HOA dictator and now you are dealing with the fallout. That is not my problem." "You cannot operate your business without HOA approval," Patricia said, her voice taking on a threatening tone. "If you resume sales without a variance, we will fine you into bankruptcy." "Then I guess people better find another source of firewood," I said. "Because I am not operating in Meadowbrook Hills, and I am not accepting your offer. Now please leave my house." Patricia left without another word, her heels clicking sharply on my hardwood floor. I watched through the window as she got into her luxury SUV and drove away, probably heading home to her well-heated house with its professionally installed gas fireplace that she never actually used. The next day, I got a call from Jennifer Cole, my lawyer. "Andrew, I just got a very interesting phone call from the Meadowbrook Hills HOA attorney. They are threatening legal action if you do not resume firewood sales to residents." "Wait, what?" I said, confused. "They are threatening to sue me for not selling firewood." "Apparently they are exploring a theory that you are engaged in some kind of retaliatory action that constitutes harassment of other homeowners. It is a ridiculous argument, but they are making noise about it." "Can they actually do that?" Jennifer laughed. "No. You have no obligation to sell your product to anyone. This is America, not Soviet Russia. They are just trying to intimidate you. My advice is to ignore it completely." The special meeting to address the bylaw amendments was scheduled for the week before Christmas. I decided not to attend, figuring my presence would just inflame tensions and distract from the real issue. Tom went and gave me a full report afterward. According to him, over 150 residents packed into the clubhouse, the largest turnout in the HOA's history. Patricia tried to maintain control of the meeting, but she was facing a hostile crowd. Multiple homeowners stood up to share stories of how the firewood shortage was affecting them. Sarah Richardson spoke tearfully about having to choose between paying her electric bill and buying overpriced wood from distant suppliers. An elderly couple on fixed income explained that they had been keeping their thermostat at 55 degrees to save money, making their own home barely livable. Patricia's defense was that the shortage was temporary and not the HOA's fault. She blamed me personally for refusing to sell to residents, characterizing my position as a vindictive attack on the community. A few of her supporters echoed this narrative, arguing that I was the villain in the situation. But Tom and others who understood what had really happened pushed back hard. Tom stood up and gave a detailed explanation of how Patricia had pushed through bylaw changes without proper community input, specifically targeting my business, despite it having operated without incident for years. He pointed out that the current crisis was entirely predictable and entirely preventable, and that Patricia's leadership had directly caused the harm people were experiencing. The vote to overturn the bylaw amendments passed with over 80% support. Patricia tried to argue that the vote was procedurally flawed and that she would not recognize it, but the other two board members, sensing which way the wind was blowing, sided with the residents. The amendments were officially repealed, effective immediately. Tom called me from the parking lot after the meeting. "You won, Andrew. The bylaws are back to the way they were. You can resume operations." "That is great news," I said, "but I am not sure I want to." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Patricia and her supporters spent the last month telling everyone that I am the problem. Half the neighborhood probably believes I let them freeze out of spite. Why would I want to do business with people who think that about me? Andrew, most people do not think that. They understand what happened. And the families who need your help, they really need it. You know Sarah is struggling. The Kowalskis just had their furnace break down and cannot afford to fix it until January. People are desperate." I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. "I will think about it, Tom. I am just tired of this whole mess." That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to maintain my boycott, to let the community continue suffering as a consequence of their elected leadership's decisions. But another part of me, the part that had started this business in the first place, remembered that I genuinely enjoyed helping people. I liked the satisfaction of delivering a cord of quality wood to a family's driveway, knowing they would be warm and comfortable through the winter. The money was nice, but it was never really about the money. The deciding factor came 2 days later. Sarah Richardson showed up at my door in the middle of a snowstorm, her 2 kids shivering in the back seat of her old sedan. She had driven out to my property despite the dangerous road conditions because she was that desperate. "Andrew, please," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know you do not owe me anything, but my house is 40 degrees inside. I cannot keep my kids there. I have been staying at a friend's place, but I cannot do that indefinitely. I am begging you, please sell me some firewood. I will pay whatever you want." Looking at those scared kids in the back seat, I made my decision. "I will deliver a cord to your house this afternoon. No charge." "I cannot accept charity," Sarah protested. "It is not charity. Consider it back payment for the business you gave me over the past 3 years. Just pay it forward when you can." I spent the next 3 days working from dawn until midnight, delivering firewood to every family in Meadowbrook Hills who needed it. Some paid full price, some paid what they could afford, and some I did not charge at all. My off-site inventory dropped significantly, but I did not care. This was the right thing to do. Word spread quickly that I was back in business. My phone rang constantly with orders, not just from previous customers, but from people who had never bought from me before. Several residents who had supported Patricia's initial bylaw changes called to apologize, admitting they had not understood the implications. I accepted their apologies and filled their orders without judgment. Patricia, notably, did not call. I heard through the grapevine that she was trying to organize a recall campaign to overturn the special meeting vote, but she had no support. 2 weeks after the meeting, both of the other board members resigned, citing personal reasons but clearly not wanting to be associated with her anymore. That left Patricia as the sole remaining board member, technically still president but effectively powerless. By mid-January, life in Meadowbrook Hills had largely returned to normal. My firewood business was running smoothly again, and the panic of December had faded. I had even begun stacking wood on my deck again, exactly as I had before, and nobody said a word about it. Then came the incident that changed everything. It was a Friday afternoon in late January when Tom called me, his voice tense and urgent. "Andrew, you need to get down to the community clubhouse right now. Patricia is doing something crazy." I drove over immediately, finding a small crowd gathered outside the building. Through the windows, I could see Patricia inside, apparently changing the locks on the door while several boxes of HOA records sat stacked nearby. Tom met me in the parking lot. "She is claiming that since the other board members resigned, she has sole authority over HOA assets and records," Tom explained. "She is changing the locks to prevent anyone else from accessing the clubhouse or the files. She said something about how people do not appreciate her service and that she is going to run things her way from now on." "Can she do that?" I asked. "Hell no," Tom said. "The clubhouse is community property. Those records belong to all of us. She is essentially stealing HOA assets." I walked up to the door and knocked. Patricia appeared on the other side of the glass, power drill in hand, and shook her head. "The clubhouse is closed for reorganization," she called through the door. "Come back next week." "Patricia, you cannot lock everyone out of a community building," I said. "That is not legal. I am the HOA president and I have full authority over community facilities. If you have a problem with that, contact our lawyer." "I think we need to contact the police instead," Tom said loudly. Patricia's eyes widened. "You would not dare. I have not done anything illegal." "You are changing locks on a building you do not own and restricting access to records that belong to all homeowners," I pointed out. "That is probably several different crimes." One of the other residents, a man named Mike who worked as a county sheriff's deputy, pulled out his phone. "I am calling the sheriff's office right now. This is definitely illegal." Patricia's face went pale. She set down the drill and opened the door, stepping outside with forced confidence. "Fine, call whoever you want. I am acting within my authority as board president." This is just more harassment from people who cannot accept proper leadership. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived about 15 minutes later. One of them was someone I knew slightly from around town, Deputy Marcus Webb. He listened to both sides of the story, examined the locks Patricia had been installing, and looked through some legal documentation that Tom had brought showing the HOA's bylaws about community property access. "Madam, I am going to need you to reinstall the original locks and return all HOA property to the clubhouse," Deputy Webb said finally. "You do not have the authority to restrict access to community facilities or remove community records." "This is outrageous," Patricia sputtered. "I am being targeted because I tried to bring some standards to this neighborhood. These people have been undermining me at every turn." "That may be, but what you are doing right now is illegal," Deputy Webb said patiently. "If you do not comply voluntarily, I will have to arrest you for theft and vandalism of community property." The color drained completely from Patricia's face. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely scared rather than just angry. You are not serious." "I am completely serious, madam. You have two options: cooperate right now or I place you under arrest. Your choice." Patricia looked around at the gathered crowd, perhaps hoping for support, but found only cold stares and a few satisfied smiles. Her shoulders sagged. "Fine. I will put everything back." It took her about an hour to reverse what she had done, reinstalling the old locks under Deputy Webb's supervision and moving all the boxes of records back inside. The deputy stayed until she was finished, then gave her a formal warning that any further incidents would result in immediate arrest. After they left, Patricia got in her SUV and drove away without saying another word to anyone. The next morning, I found out through Tom that Patricia had submitted her resignation as HOA president, effective immediately. Her resignation letter, sent via email to all residents, was bitter and accusatory. She claimed that she had tried to improve the community, but faced nothing but obstruction and harassment. She blamed me specifically for turning the neighborhood against her, and she said that Meadowbrook Hills deserved whatever decline it experienced now that proper leadership was gone. She ended by announcing that she was putting her house on the market and moving back to Washington State. I felt a complex mix of emotions reading that email. Relief, certainly. Satisfaction that justice had been served. But also a strange kind of pity for someone so convinced of their own righteousness that they could not see how their actions had hurt others. Patricia had come to Montana with ideas about community improvement, but she had never bothered to understand the community she was trying to improve. She had seen problems where none existed and created real problems in the process. The HOA held emergency elections in February. Tom was elected president, and two reasonable, level-headed neighbors joined him on the board. Their first official action was to permanently enshrine protections for small home-based businesses in the bylaws, with specific language about firewood sales being permitted. They also implemented new rules requiring much broader community input before any major bylaw changes could be approved. Patricia's house sold quickly despite the winter market. I heard she took a significant loss because she was so eager to leave. A young couple from Missoula bought it, and they became customers of mine before they had even finished unpacking. The husband, a Forest Service worker, appreciated the irony of the situation when I told him the story. "So the previous owner tried to shut down your firewood business and then had to leave because she made everyone angry," he laughed. "That is perfect. Well, we will take 3 cords to start, and we will probably need regular deliveries all winter." By March, the crisis was a memory. The rest of winter proceeded without major incident, and my business continued to grow. I had picked up so many new customers during the December emergency that I was actually struggling to keep up with demand. I ended up hiring a part-time helper, a high school kid named Jake, who was saving money for college and did not mind the hard work. Spring came late that year, with snow lingering into early April. But when it finally arrived, bringing warmer temperatures and the first green shoots pushing through the thawing ground, it felt like more than just a seasonal change. The whole neighborhood seemed lighter, friendlier, more connected. People actually talked to each other again, instead of living in fear of HOA citations. Tom organized a community barbecue in May, held on the grounds around the clubhouse. It was the biggest neighborhood gathering in years, with over 100 people attending. Someone set up a volleyball net. Kids ran around playing tag, and the smell of grilled burgers filled the air. I brought one of my latest loads of firewood and built a bonfire as the sun set, and people gathered around it to talk and laugh and enjoy the spring evening. Sarah Richardson found me by the fire, her 2 kids roasting marshmallows nearby. "I never got to properly thank you," she said. "For the firewood you gave us in December, we would have been in serious trouble without your help." "You would have done the same for me," I said. "Maybe. But you did not have to help after everything that happened. You had every right to stay mad at the whole neighborhood." "I was never mad at the neighborhood," I said. "Just at one person who thought she knew better than everyone else." Sarah smiled. "Well, she is gone now, and good riddance. Things are better with Tom in charge. He actually listens to people." As if on cue, Tom appeared with a beer in each hand, offering me one. "I have been thinking," he said, "we should put up a plaque or something at the clubhouse. A reminder about what happens when people let power go to their heads. Or we could just move on and not dwell on the past," I suggested. "You are probably right," Tom agreed. "Though I still cannot believe she tried to lock everyone out of the building. What did she think was going to happen?" "She thought she was in control," I said. "That is the problem with people like that. They cannot imagine a world where their authority is not absolute." The party went late into the night, and I stayed until the fire burned down to embers. Driving home on the quiet roads, I thought about everything that had happened over the past 6 months. The conflict with the HOA, the winter crisis, Patricia's downfall, and the community's recovery. It had been stressful and sometimes infuriating, but in a strange way it had also brought out the best in people. When the chips were down, the residents of Meadowbrook Hills had come together, rejected bad leadership, and chosen a better path forward. My firewood business continued to thrive through the following years. The incident with Patricia became a neighborhood legend, the kind of story that got told at gatherings and passed down to new residents as a cautionary tale. I became something of a local celebrity, not because of anything I had done, but simply because I had refused to be bullied and had let the natural consequences of bad policy play out. 3 years later, I was stacking firewood on my deck on a crisp September morning when a car pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 30s got out, looking slightly nervous. "Are you Andrew Northwood?" she asked. "That is me." "I am Jennifer. I just moved into the neighborhood last week. Someone told me you sell firewood, and I wanted to place an order for the winter." "Sure thing," I said. "How much do you need?" "Probably 4 or 5 cords. We heat mostly with wood." "Oh, and I heard you had some kind of drama with the HOA a few years back." "Something about them trying to shut you down," I smiled. "That is a long story. Come inside and I will tell you about it while we fill out your order form." As I led her into my house, I glanced back at the neatly stacked cords of oak and maple on my deck, arranged exactly as they always had been. Some battles are worth fighting, not because you will necessarily win, but because losing the fight would mean losing something essential about who you are. I had started a business to help my neighbors and make a living doing work I enjoyed. When someone tried to take that away for arbitrary reasons, I had pushed back. And when the opportunity came to either gloat or help, I had chosen to help. That, more than any bylaw or policy, is what makes a community worth living in. Not rules and regulations and aesthetic standards, but the simple human choice to take care of each other, especially when times are hard. Patricia never understood that, and it cost her everything. The rest of us learned the lesson, and we were better for it. I spent the next half hour telling Jennifer the whole story while we drank coffee at my kitchen table. She listened with wide eyes, occasionally asking questions or shaking her head in disbelief. When I finished, she sat back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. "Wow," she said. "That is incredible. And people really were freezing because of one person's ego. It was never really about aesthetics or property values," I explained. "It was about control. Patricia wanted to impose her vision on everyone else, regardless of whether it made sense for this community. She came from a place where HOAs run everything and neighbors never interact except to complain about each other. She tried to turn Meadowbrook Hills into that, and people rejected it. "Good," Jennifer said firmly. "I moved here specifically to get away from that kind of place. My last neighborhood had an HOA that would cite you if your grass was a quarter inch too long. It was miserable. This feels different, more real." "It is now," I said, "but it took some work to keep it that way." I wrote up her order for 5 cords, with delivery scheduled for mid-October after the wood had fully seasoned. As she was leaving, she turned back with a smile. "Thanks for the coffee and the story, and thanks for not giving in when that HOA lady tried to push you around. People like you are the reason communities actually work." After she left, I went back outside to continue stacking. The physical work felt good, the repetitive motion of lifting and placing each log therapeutic in its simplicity. This was honest work, providing something people needed, building relationships one delivery at a time. No amount of bureaucratic nonsense could take away the fundamental value of that. The years rolled on, and Meadowbrook Hills continued to grow and evolve. New families moved in, babies were born, and the original residents gradually transitioned into the comfortable role of neighborhood elders. Tom served as HOA president for 4 years before passing the torch to someone else, but he remained active in community affairs. The monthly HOA meetings became genuinely productive gatherings, where people discussed real issues like snow removal and playground maintenance, rather than petty enforcement actions. I expanded my business gradually, adding a second delivery truck and hiring Jake full-time after he graduated high school, and decided to defer college for a few years. We started offering splitting and stacking services for customers who bought wood but could not handle the physical labor themselves. The business grew beyond Meadowbrook Hills, serving customers throughout Flathead County, but my home neighborhood remained the core. Every December, around the anniversary of that difficult winter when Patricia had tried to shut me down, I would get calls or visits from residents thanking me for standing firm. Sarah Richardson always sent me a Christmas card with a picture of her kids, now teenagers, standing in front of their wood stove. The Kowalskis would invite me over for dinner. Tom would show up with a bottle of good whiskey, and we would sit on my porch, watching the snow fall and remembering the craziness of those few months. Patricia never came back to Montana, as far as I knew. Someone told me they had seen her social media profile, and she was living in a suburb of Tacoma, serving on another HOA board. I hoped she had learned something from her experience in Meadowbrook Hills, but I was not optimistic. Some people are so invested in their own sense of correctness that they can never admit mistakes or change course. 5 years after the incident, the community decided to renovate the clubhouse. During the planning meetings, someone suggested naming it after a longtime resident who had contributed to the neighborhood. Several names were proposed, including mine. I immediately objected, finding the idea embarrassing and unnecessary. But Tom stood up and made a short speech. "Andrew does not want his name on a building, and I respect that," he said. "But I think we should acknowledge what happened 5 years ago in some way. Not to glorify conflict, but to remember that communities work best when people stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. We almost lost something important because we were not paying attention. Let us not forget that lesson." The final compromise was a simple plaque installed near the clubhouse entrance. It did not mention me by name or tell the specific story. Instead, it just said, "A community thrives when neighbors support each other and leadership serves the people. May we always remember to listen, to help, and to stand together. The dedication date was listed as December 15, the day the special meeting had overturned Patricia's bylaws. I appreciated the subtlety of it. Anyone who had been there would understand the reference, but it was not about settling old scores or claiming victory. It was about values, about the kind of community we wanted to be. On the evening of the clubhouse rededication ceremony, most of the neighborhood turned out despite the cold weather. There were speeches, refreshments, and a general sense of celebration. I stood in the back, content to observe rather than participate in the spotlight. But when the formal program ended and people began to mingle, I found myself surrounded by neighbors wanting to chat, shake my hand, or share their own memories of that winter. A woman I did not recognize approached me. She appeared to be in her 50s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Mr. Northwood, I am Rebecca Brennan, Patricia's sister." I was stunned. Oh, I did not know Patricia had family in the area. "I do not live here," Rebecca said. "I am just visiting for the holidays and I heard about this ceremony. I wanted to come and meet you and to apologize for my sister's behavior." "You do not need to apologize for her," I said. "You did not do anything wrong." "I know, but still. I want you to understand that Patricia was not always like that. She went through a difficult divorce, lost her job, and then moved out here trying to start over. I think she was trying to prove something, maybe to herself more than anyone else. She wanted to feel in control when her whole life had fallen apart. That does not excuse what she did, but it might explain it." "I appreciate you telling me," I said. "Is she doing okay now?" Rebecca hesitated. "She is surviving. Still angry at the world, unfortunately. She is convinced that everyone else was the problem and that she was treated unfairly. I have tried to help her see things differently, but she is stubborn. Some people would rather be right than be happy." We talked for a few more minutes before she excused herself to head back to her hotel. The conversation stayed with me, though. It is easy to turn people into villains when they oppose you, to strip away their humanity and reduce them to caricatures. Patricia had made real mistakes and caused real harm, but she was also a person who had been hurting and had lashed out in all the wrong ways. That did not absolve her of responsibility for her actions, but it complicated the story in ways that made it more human. Winter eased into spring once again, following the rhythm that defines life in Montana. The snowpack melted, the rivers ran high with runoff, and the valley turned impossibly green. I took advantage of the warmer weather to cut a new supply of firewood, spending long days in the forest with my chainsaw and truck. Jake worked alongside me, and we fell into an easy partnership of shared labor and comfortable silence. One afternoon in June, we were loading the truck when Jake asked, "Do you ever regret how things went down with the HOA? Like, if you had just moved your woodpile somewhere less visible, you could have avoided all that drama." I thought about the question while hefting a round of pine into the truck bed. "No, I do not regret it. If I had compromised on something I knew was wrong, it would have set a precedent. Patricia would have kept pushing, finding new things to regulate, and nobody would have stood up to her. Sometimes you have to draw a line." "But people suffered," Jake pointed out. "Families you cared about were freezing." "They suffered because of Patricia's decisions, not mine," I said. "That is an important distinction. I did not create the problem. I just refused to solve a problem I did not cause while rewarding the person who caused it. In the long run, I think that was the right call. The community learned something important." Jake nodded slowly. "I guess that makes sense." "It just seems harsh." "Leadership often does," I said. "Whether you are running an HOA or just running your own life, sometimes you have to make hard choices and live with the consequences. The key is making sure you can live with yourself afterward." We finished loading the truck as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. The light turned golden, casting long shadows across the clearing where we had been working. I looked around at the forest, the stacks of fresh-cut wood, the reliable old truck that had served me for years. This was my life, simple and honest and exactly what I wanted it to be. No one had the right to take that away based on arbitrary aesthetic preferences, and I was glad I had fought to keep it. The remainder of that summer passed quietly. My business maintained its steady rhythm of cutting, splitting, seasoning, and delivering. I took on a few more clients from neighboring communities, but I was careful not to expand too quickly. The goal was never to build some kind of firewood empire. It was just to make a decent living doing work I enjoyed, helping people stay warm, and maintaining the independence that comes from being your own boss. In late August, the HOA held its annual meeting to elect board members and discuss the year ahead. I attended out of a sense of civic duty, though I did not plan to get involved in HOA politics. Tom was stepping down after his term, and a woman named Linda was running for president. She seemed competent and level-headed, exactly the kind of boring, functional leadership that HOAs need. During the open forum section of the meeting, Linda addressed me directly. "Andrew, I want to thank you publicly for your service to this community. Your firewood business has been a lifeline for many families, including mine. And the stand you took a few years ago, well, it reminded all of us that we need to think carefully about the rules we make and who they really serve. So thank you." There was a round of applause which made me uncomfortable, but I nodded in appreciation. "I just did what made sense," I said. "Anyone else would have done the same." "Maybe," Linda said, "but you were the one who actually did it. That matters." Elections proceeded smoothly, and Linda was voted in as the new president. Her first official statement was a promise to maintain the community-focused approach that had developed over the past few years, with an emphasis on practical problem-solving rather than aesthetic nitpicking. It was exactly what everyone wanted to hear. As fall approached, the familiar rhythm of preparing for winter began again. Orders started coming in, the phone rang more frequently, and my calendar filled up with delivery dates. I hired a third part-time worker, a college student named Emily who was studying forestry and wanted hands-on experience. The three of us formed a good team, each bringing different strengths to the operation. One October morning, I was doing a delivery to a new customer on the far side of Meadowbrook Hills when I noticed something interesting. The house across the street had a sign in the yard. "Vote no on Proposition 12. Protect home businesses." I had not been following local politics closely, so I asked my customer about it. "Oh, that is a county ballot measure," she explained. "Some people are trying to pass stricter regulations on home-based businesses. Licensing requirements, zoning restrictions, that kind of thing. It is supposedly about protecting residential character, but a lot of us think it is just bureaucratic overreach." "Sounds familiar," I said. "Right. After what happened with your situation, a lot of people around here are sensitive about this stuff. We do not want the county doing what Patricia tried to do. There is a pretty organized opposition campaign." I had not realized that the HOA battle had resonated beyond Meadowbrook Hills, but it made sense. Small communities like ours depend on informal economic networks. The person who does small engine repair out of their garage, the seamstress who works from her spare bedroom, the guy who sells firewood off his deck. Overregulation of these activities might sound good in theory, but in practice, it just makes life harder for working people trying to get by. Over the next few weeks, I started paying more attention to the proposition debate. The supporters argued it was about maintaining property values and ensuring safety standards. The opponents argued it was about government overreach and protecting economic freedom. The rhetoric sounded familiar, echoing the same divisions that had played out in my HOA conflict. A group of local business owners reached out to me, asking if I would speak at a public forum about my experience with HOA regulations. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to become a public figure or political spokesman, but after thinking about it, I agreed. My story was relevant, and if sharing it could help people understand the real-world impact of these policies, it seemed worth doing. The forum was held at the county building in Kalispell on a Thursday evening. About 100 people attended, including supporters and opponents of the proposition, as well as reporters from local media. I sat on a panel with 4 other people, 2 small business owners, a county commissioner who supported the measure, and a lawyer who opposed it. When my turn came to speak, I kept it simple and direct. I told the story of how the HOA had tried to shut down my firewood business, how it had created a crisis for families who depended on affordable heating fuel, and how the community had ultimately rejected those restrictions. I emphasized that I was not against reasonable regulations, but that policies needed to consider practical impacts on real people's lives. When you make rules from behind a desk, thinking only about abstract principles like property values or aesthetic appeal, you miss the human element, I said. My firewood business is not some abstract commercial operation. It is how families stay warm, how I make my living, and how neighbors help each other. Any regulation that ignores those realities is a bad regulation, no matter how good it sounds on paper. The county commissioner who supported the proposition pushed back, arguing that some oversight was necessary to prevent bad actors and protect community standards. We had a respectful exchange, and I acknowledged that his concerns were not unreasonable. But I maintained that the proposed regulations went too far, creating bureaucratic barriers that would hurt more than they helped. The forum ended without any clear resolution, as these things usually do. But afterward, several people approached me to share their own stories of dealing with overregulation or to thank me for speaking up. One man, a contractor who ran his business from his home, told me that my HOA story had inspired him to fight a citation from his own homeowners association. He had won, and his business was still operating. Proposition 12 ended up failing by a comfortable margin when voters went to the polls in November. I do not know how much my involvement influenced the outcome, but I was glad to see common sense prevail. Sometimes people just need to hear real stories about how policies affect real lives. The abstract principle of regulation sounds fine until you meet the family freezing because someone banned their firewood supplier. Winter arrived on schedule, bringing its usual challenges and rewards. My business was busier than ever, but I had learned to manage the workload better. Jake and Emily were both reliable and hardworking, handling deliveries and customer service while I focused on cutting and processing wood. We developed efficient systems that kept everything running smoothly, even during the busiest weeks. December came, marking 5 years since the winter of the Great Firewood Crisis. Several neighbors mentioned the anniversary, half joking about the good old days when people were freezing and the HOA was at war with its own residents. It had become the kind of story that improves with retelling, taking on legendary qualities, though the core facts remained accurate. Sarah Richardson invited me to dinner to mark the occasion. Her kids were now in high school, grown into confident young adults. Over the meal, Sarah told me that she had joined the HOA board the previous year and was working on codifying policies that would protect residents from future Patricias. We are setting up review processes that require broader input before major bylaw changes, she explained. And we are creating formal protections for existing businesses and activities that have been operating without problems. Your Firewood operation is specifically mentioned as an example of the kind of community benefit we want to encourage, not restrict. I appreciate that, I said, though I hope we do not need those protections. The current board seems pretty reasonable. They are, Sarah agreed. But boards change. People move in and out. We need structural safeguards so that one strong-willed person cannot hijack the whole organization again. That was the lesson we learned the hard way. The conversation reminded me that institutions are only as good as the people who run them and the systems that constrain those people's power. The HOA had failed when it was run by someone who prioritized control over service. It had recovered when the community reasserted its values and installed better leadership. But eternal vigilance was the price of keeping it functional. As winter deepened, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past 5 years. The conflict with Patricia, the winter crisis, the community's recovery, and all the ripples that had spread outward from those events. It had been stressful and sometimes painful, but it had also clarified what mattered to me: independence, community, and the freedom to live according to my own values rather than someone else's vision of how things should be. The Firewood business continued to thrive, providing heat and comfort to hundreds of families across the region. My deck remained stacked with neat cords of seasoned wood, exactly as it had always been, a visible symbol of my refusal to be pushed around by arbitrary authority. New residents would sometimes ask about the famous HOA battle, and I would tell them the story, always emphasizing the community's role in pushing back against bad leadership. Patricia's house, now occupied by a friendly family who loved Montana and appreciated the neighborhood's character, stood as a reminder that places outlast the people who temporarily inhabit them. Communities are built on relationships and shared values, not on the vision of any single person, no matter how convinced they are of their own righteousness. On a clear February night, with temperatures below zero and stars blazing in the Montana sky, I stood on my deck looking out at the forest beyond my property. Smoke rose from chimneys throughout Meadowbrook Hills, each column marking a warm house where people were safe and comfortable. Much of that wood had come from my operation, cut and split and delivered by me and my team. It was honest work, serving a real need, and nobody could take it away from me. I heard a truck pulling into my driveway and turned to see Tom's familiar vehicle. He climbed out carrying a bottle and 2 glasses. "Figured you might be up," he said. "Seemed like a good night for a drink." We sat in my outdoor chairs, bundled in heavy coats, and Tom poured us each a generous measure of whiskey. The liquor burned pleasantly going down, warming from the inside out. 5 years, Tom said, raising his glass, to surviving Patricia and her crusade against common sense. To surviving, I agreed, clinking my glass against his. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the quiet creak of the forest. Finally, Tom spoke again. "You know what the real victory was? It was not making Patricia leave or getting the bylaws changed. It was showing everyone that they had power, that they could push back when something was wrong. A lot of people learned that lesson, and it made us all stronger." "That is a nice way of looking at it," I said. "It is the truth," Tom insisted. "Before all that happened, most people just accepted whatever the HOA said. They figured someone else knew better. After you took your stand and people saw the consequences, They realized they could question authority. They could demand better. That changed the whole culture around here. I thought about that for a while, sipping my whiskey and watching the smoke rise from distant chimneys. Maybe Tom was right. Maybe the real impact was not about firewood or HOA bylaws, but about people remembering their own power and responsibility. Communities work when people participate, when they care enough to speak up and push back against bad ideas. The night was getting colder, the kind of cold that seeps through layers of clothing and reminds you how hostile nature can be. But inside the houses of Meadowbrook Hills, behind the walls and windows where wood stoves burned and families gathered, it was warm. And I had played a small part in making that possible, both by providing the wood and by refusing to let bad leadership undermine a community that depended on what I offered. That was enough. That was everything. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human drama. Tom and I finished our drinks and said our goodbyes, each heading to our own warm homes. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, checked the wood stove one last time to make sure it would burn through the night, and lay down to sleep. Tomorrow would bring more work. Wood to cut, orders to fill, deliveries to make. The rhythm would continue as it always had, through seasons and years, through conflicts and resolutions. And I would continue doing what I had always done, providing a service that people needed, maintaining my independence and standing firm when principle required it. That was my story. Not the tale of a hero or a victim, but just a regular person who had drawn a line when it mattered and had been proven right. Sometimes that is all it takes to make a difference. Knowing where you stand and refusing to be moved, even when the pressure is intense and the consequences are unclear. The HOA had banned firewood stacking on my deck, trying to push me out of business over aesthetic concerns that mattered to nobody except one controlling person. So I had stopped selling to their freezing members, letting them experience the full impact of that decision. When they finally understood what they had done, they changed course. And in the end, everyone learned something valuable about power, community, and the importance of thinking through the consequences of your actions before you impose them on others. It was a simple lesson, but sometimes the simple ones are the most important.